No one screamed when the doors closed. They had learned that sound does not carry through stone. 7 entered. None returned. The labyrinth was not rumor. It was structure designed to consume movement. At its center, something breathed. Heavy, patient. Hooves against rock. The city called it tribute. He called it pattern. Patterns can be broken, but only from the inside. He did not volunteer out of impulse. He studied the structure first. Every cycle ended the same. Doors sealed. Silence followed. Names erased. The monster was blamed. The maze was ignored. That was the mistake. The creature hunted by instinct. The labyrinth hunted by design. Instinct can be baited. Design can be mapped. He would not fight rage with rage. He would fight system with sequence. The corridors did not twist randomly. They repeated angles with deliberate cruelty. Narrow passages forced hesitation. Sudden openings invited exposure. Torches died quickly in the stale air. He memorized the rhythm of intersections before stepping fully inside. Breath steady, hand against stone, counting distance between turns. Fear feeds on confusion. Confusion is manufactured. Manufactured systems can be decoded. Before the gates closed, she placed something in his hand. Not a weapon, a line. Thread thin enough to seem fragile, strong enough to anchor intention. Tie this at the entrance, she said, and never lose it. He did not mistake it for romance. It was strategy. In a place built to disorient, direction becomes survival. The labyrinth devours memory. The line preserves sequence. The gate sealed behind them with finality that echoed through bone. Stone does not negotiate. He tied the thread firmly and stepped forward without haste. Panic wastes oxygen. The others looked to him, searching for certainty he did not pretend to feel. Confidence is not absence of fear. It is containment. The labyrinth offered no sound but distant impact. Hoof against rock, closer than it should be. The first corridor narrowed until shoulders brushed cold stone. Breath echoed too loudly. He slowed the group, not to rest, but to listen. The labyrinth carried sound unpredictably. A single impact could mean distance or proximity. He pulled the thread gently to confirm tension. Still anchored, still aligned. Alignment is control. Control prevents collapse. Somewhere deeper, something exhaled with weight that shook dust from the ceiling. They found the first remains near a collapsed junction, not bones. Armor dented inward as if struck by force that did not hesitate. The horned skull impression remained embedded in bronze. No slash marks, no duel. Impact, direct and overwhelming. The others faltered. He did not. This confirmed what he suspected. The creature did not stalk cautiously. It charged. Charges can be redirected. The air shifted before the sound arrived. A tremor through stone. Then the impact, hooves striking ground with accelerating force. He pulled the group sharply into a side passage, pressing them against shadowed recesses. The beast burst through the corridor they had occupied seconds earlier. Horn scraping stone, breath violent. It did not slow. It did not think. It pursued movement. That was the flaw. He did not run. Running feeds pursuit. Instead, he stepped deliberately into a wider chamber and tugged the thread twice, marking position. Stone columns fractured the space unevenly. Limited visibility, controlled angles. The beast would charge again. He positioned himself where momentum would betray it. Breath slowed, grip adjusted. The labyrinth was no longer hunting him. He was arranging the collision. The impact came with violent certainty. The creature burst into the chamber, massive shoulders scraping stone, horn lowered without hesitation. He pivoted at the final second, guiding the charge toward a column already fractured by age. Stone exploded on contact. The beast staggered, stunned but alive. That imbalance was everything. Strength fades during chaos, precision strikes during collapse. He stepped forward as momentum betrayed the monster. The beast recovered faster than expected. Pain did not slow it. It redirected. Hooves tore across stone, nostrils flaring, eyes searching for movement. He did not retreat blindly. He adjusted distance, keeping columns between them, forcing turns too tight for that massive frame. The labyrinth, once prison, became advantage. Every narrow angle reduced the creature's power. Every obstruction converted brute force into wasted momentum. It charged again, angrier now, but anger narrows vision. He stepped just close enough to trigger pursuit, then cut sharply left, pulling the thread behind him to maintain orientation. The creature slammed into stone where he had stood, horn splitting rock, but failing to split flesh. Dust filled the chamber. Visibility dropped. Perfect. In chaos, instinct dominates. Instinct can be anticipated. Anticipation wins. The king who had issued the command did not smile. Authority prefers outcomes it controls. Perseus had delivered success, but not submission. The severed head rested concealed, yet its presence shifted the balance of power silently. A man who survives a death sentence is no longer predictable. Perseus understood that his mission had not ended in the cavern. It had evolved. The true negotiation would begin now. The creature howled, not in strategy but in pain. Blood darkened the stone, thick and immediate. It turned violently, swinging its horn in blind retaliation. He did not press forward recklessly. Wounded beasts become unpredictable. Instead, he widened the circle, forcing it to pivot repeatedly within the confined chamber. Each turn drained strength. Each misstep reduced balance. Endurance, not fury, would finish this. The chamber tightened around them as dust settled. The beast no longer charged blindly. It circled, bleeding, but aware now that resistance had structure. He adjusted his stance, blade low, thread brushing his wrist like a pulse reminding him of direction. This was no longer pursuit. It was calculation against fury. One mistake would mean bone crushed against stone. He waited for the breath before the rush. He revealed the head only when the moment demanded finality. No speech, no warning. Bronze lifted slightly, fabric pulled back, and stone answered arrogance. The king did not fall screaming. He froze mid-command, authority preserved in permanent silence. Perseus did not watch long. The act was not rage, it was correction. Those who manipulate risk must be prepared to face consequence. Strategy, when executed precisely, eliminates negotiation. The blade did not end it immediately. The creature roared and struck wildly, smashing a column in half as blood spread across the floor. The chamber trembled under its weight. He did not rush the final blow. Desperation kills faster than horns. He circled, forcing it to turn, forcing exhaustion to compete with rage. Breath grew uneven. Movements lost precision. When the beast staggered, knee buckling against stone, he closed the distance without hesitation. The beast rose one final time, not with speed, but with stubborn force that refused collapse. Blood streamed down its flank, dark against stone, pooling where hooves scraped for traction. It lowered its head for a last charge, more instinct than strategy. He did not retreat. He advanced. Stepping off the direct line at the final heartbeat, he seized the horn, redirected the weight, and drove the blade upward beneath the jaw, pushing until resistance broke and silence replaced impact. The silence that followed was heavier than the fight. No echo of hooves, no breath tearing through dust, only the slow drip of blood across stone designed to consume the living. He did not celebrate. He stood still, confirming absence of movement, blade steady, chest rising in controlled rhythm. The labyrinth had not been defeated by strength. It had been unraveled step by step. He reached for the thread and began the return. The thread guided him through corridors that no longer felt infinite. Behind him, the beast was gone, reduced to silence and blood on stone. Ahead, the labyrinth still tried to mislead with false turns and narrowing paths. He ignored them. Speed would undo discipline. Victory inside the chamber meant nothing if he failed to leave. He followed the line steadily, breath controlled, body tight with focus, until the air changed and stone gates emerged from shadow. Light appeared gradually, not as triumph but as confirmation. The outer gate stood ahead, massive and indifferent, as if unaware of what had changed within its walls. He did not quicken his pace. The labyrinth was most dangerous when it sensed departure. A final misstep, a final turn taken in haste would erase everything earned. He kept the thread taut, eyes forward, resisting relief until stone truly ended and open air replaced confinement. The gates opened slowly, stone grinding against stone. No cheers followed, only silence. Those waiting searched his face before looking past him into the darkness. No other footsteps came. The absence was answer enough. He did not raise his blade or claim victory. The thread remained around his wrist, proof that the labyrinth had been entered and exited by design, not chance. Behind him, the maze sealed again, but its center was no longer undefeated. News spread before celebration could form. The tribute cycle had ended, not through bargain or surrender, but through disruption. Parents who once prepared for loss now stood uncertain, unsure how to process survival. The palace doors remained closed longer than expected. Power does not adjust quickly when fear is removed. He did not demand recognition. The absence of future sacrifices would be statement enough. A system designed to consume had been entered, understood, and broken from within. The king did not address the city immediately. Authority built on terror does not recover easily once terror collapses. Messengers moved quietly through corridors, recalculating alliances that had depended on the labyrinth's inevitability. He understood this shift. The monster's death was not only physical, it was structural. Tribute had enforced obedience. Obedience had enforced silence. With the center removed, the outer layers would begin to fracture on their own. He did not remain long enough to let politics reshape the narrative. The labyrinth had been defeated through precision, not spectacle. Spectacle invites distortion. Precision preserves truth. He left before speeches could dilute what had occurred within those walls. The thread now coiled in his hand no longer served navigation. It served memory, a reminder that even the most oppressive structures depend on rules, and rules, once understood, can be dismantled. He understood that the labyrinth had never been only stone. It was expectation reinforced through repetition. Every cycle of sacrifice had strengthened belief in its inevitability. By surviving, he did more than kill a creature. He interrupted belief. Interruption destabilizes authority faster than force. Those who had accepted tribute as unavoidable now saw alternative structure. Fear had governed compliance. Compliance had sustained power. Remove fear, and power begins to negotiate. He did not romanticize what had happened inside those walls. The confrontation had been violent, close and unforgiving. Stone had shattered. Blood had spread. Breath had narrowed to instinct. Victory was not elegant. It was earned through discipline under pressure. That distinction mattered. Legends would simplify the fight. They would call it bravery. He knew it had been calculation layered over fear, step by deliberate step. In the days that followed, the labyrinth stood unused, its entrance guarded more by uncertainty than by force. Without the creature at its center, it was reduced to architecture. Corridors still twisted, stone still narrowed, but inevitability was gone. That was the true fracture. The maze had relied on certainty of death to maintain its authority. Remove certainty, and even stone begins to feel hollow. He understood that killing the creature had been only the visible act. The deeper victory was proving the labyrinth could be studied and survived. It had been built to overwhelm the senses, to replace direction with panic. By entering calmly, mapping its rhythm and using patience as weapon, he exposed its limits. Structures that depend on fear collapse when fear is contained. What once consumed the chosen now stood as proof that systems can be entered and broken from within. He did not claim ownership of the victory. Ownership invites rivalry. Instead, he allowed the result to speak. The tribute ships no longer sailed. The selection of youths no longer gathered in silence. Absence replaced ritual. That absence carried more weight than proclamation. The labyrinth remained standing, but it no longer dictated fate. Stone without certainty is only stone. Certainty had been its true weapon, and that weapon was gone. He understood that fear rarely disappears all at once. It lingers in corridors long after danger is removed. Some still avoided the labyrinth's entrance, as if the stone itself remembered violence. He did not dismiss that hesitation. Trauma embeds deeper than architecture. But over time, footsteps returned, voices replaced whispers. The maze remained complex, but complexity without terror becomes puzzle instead of prison. That transformation mattered more than the fallen beast. He knew that the story would grow sharper with distance, details would blur, and the confrontation would become legend rather than sequence. But sequence had been the key. Tie the thread, control the breath, study the angles, redirect the charge, strike during imbalance. Each step had mattered. Remove one and the labyrinth would have claimed him like the others. Victory had not been destiny. It had been constructed. He left the island without ceremony. No parade followed his departure, only a quiet recalculation of power behind him. The labyrinth still stood, but it no longer defined the horizon. Ships that once carried tribute now carried trade. Fear had redirected commerce and obedience for years. Remove fear, and movement changes direction. He did not look back at the stone walls. He had entered them once. That was enough. He understood that systems rarely vanish entirely. They adapt, searching for new forms of control. The labyrinth might one day be repurposed, its corridors given different meaning, but its center would never again host inevitability. That truth lingered stronger than any monument. He had entered a structure designed to consume and exited with clarity intact. Clarity is more disruptive than violence. Violence ends bodies. Clarity ends systems. He did not pretend that courage alone had carried him through stone and blood. Courage opens the door. Discipline keeps it open. Inside the maze, every decision had required restraint against impulse. Outside it, that restraint remained his anchor. The world prefers heroes who act without hesitation. He preferred hesitation measured correctly. Measure determines survival. Without measure, even strength becomes liability. In time, the labyrinth would be studied as architecture rather than threat. Scholars would trace its angles. Builders would admire its endurance. Few would feel the suffocation it once enforced. He carried that memory alone, not as trauma, but as instruction. Structures intimidate only while misunderstood. Once mapped, they shrink. Once navigated, they lose authority. Stone had not changed. Perception had. He understood that the labyrinth had been designed to erase identity. Those who entered were reduced to prey, stripped of history and future. By surviving, he reclaimed more than life. He reclaimed narrative. Narrative shapes memory. Memory shapes power. Without the certainty of sacrifice, the ruler's authority weakened quietly. The beast had enforced obedience. Its absence forced negotiation, and negotiation reshapes kingdoms more permanently than fear ever could. He did not remain to watch how power reorganized itself. He had no interest in replacing one form of dominance with another. His objective had never been the throne. It had been interruption. Interruption breaks momentum. Momentum sustains control. By ending the cycle of sacrifice, he forced authority to justify itself without terror. Justification is harder than intimidation. Intimidation silences quickly. Justification must withstand scrutiny, and scrutiny alters structures from within. He understood that the true center of the labyrinth had never been the creature. It had been certainty. Certainty that no one returned. Certainty that tribute was unavoidable. Certainty that resistance ended in silence. By surviving, he fractured that certainty beyond repair. People began to question what else had been declared inevitable. Fear isolates, questioning connects, and once doubt spreads, systems built on inevitability begin to loosen at their foundations. He knew the labyrinth would remain as warning long after its center lay empty. Future generations would walk its corridors without understanding the weight once carried there. Stone forgets nothing, even when people do. But he had altered its meaning. What once symbolized inevitable death now represented interruption. Interruption proves that structure can be challenged. Challenged structure can be rewritten, and rewritten structure changes history more quietly than conquest ever could. He understood that entering the labyrinth had required more than courage. It required accepting that fear would be present and choosing not to let it dictate movement. Fear narrows vision. He widened it. Fear accelerates impulse. He slowed it. Inside stone corridors built to disorient, control of self became the only reliable weapon. That lesson outlived the monster. Control is not absence of fear. It is mastery over reaction when consequence is immediate and irreversible. He never claimed that the fight had been clean. It had been close, violent, and unforgiving. Stone had cracked, blood had pooled, breath had shortened to survival. But brutality alone did not decide the outcome. Timing did. Positioning did. Restraint did. The beast relied on force without adjustment. He relied on adjustment under force. That difference separated collapse from continuation. In the narrowest space imaginable, awareness proved stronger than mass. He understood that the labyrinth had been a mirror. It reflected whatever entered it. Panic multiplied within its walls. Discipline multiplied as well. Those who lost control amplified their own downfall. He refused to amplify fear. Instead, he amplified sequence, step, pause, listen, adjust. That pattern carried him through darkness more reliably than any promise of heroism. Heroism burns quickly. Sequence sustains movement long enough to survive what was built to consume it. He recognized that what frightened the city most had not been the creature's strength but the maze's certainty. Certainty eliminates alternatives. When alternatives vanish, obedience becomes instinct. By returning alive, he restored alternative. Alternative restores choice. Choice disrupts control. The beast had enforced silence through inevitability. Its fall reopened possibility. Possibility is quieter than terror, but far more destabilizing to systems built on fear. He did not confuse victory with invulnerability. The labyrinth had been one structure among many. Others would exist, different in shape but similar in design. Systems that thrive on confusion and inevitability appear in every age. His survival was not immunity, it was instruction. Study the angles, identify the condition, contain the fear, strike during imbalance. The lesson extended beyond stone corridors. It became method. He understood that myths often exaggerate the monster and minimize the mind that faced it. The horns, the roar, the brute weight would dominate retellings. Few would emphasize the thread tied at the entrance or the discipline that guided each step. Yet without that thread, the confrontation would have ended differently. Without that restraint, strength would have meant nothing. Strategy rarely appears dramatic, but it is what survives when force fails. He knew the labyrinth would never apologize for what it had taken. Stone does not confess, it endures. But endurance without purpose becomes relic. Once the center was removed, its corridors lost authority. Fear requires reinforcement. Without sacrifice to renew it, fear fades. In time, children would walk near those walls without trembling. That quiet shift would be the true victory. Not the fallen beast, but the absence of dread. He understood that systems fall long before they collapse. They fall the moment inevitability is questioned. The labyrinth still stood, its stone unchanged, yet its command over fate had ended. Once people saw that survival was possible, obedience weakened. Obedience had sustained tribute. Tribute had sustained power. Remove one link and the chain slackens. The creature's death had been physical. The fracture of certainty was permanent. He did not measure the event by applause or recognition. He measured it by interruption. The tribute ships remained docked, the selection of names no longer gathered in shadowed halls, parents no longer prepared for farewell. That silence carried more weight than celebration. The labyrinth had consumed bodies for years. Now it consumed nothing. Emptiness where ritual once stood was proof that inevitability had been dismantled. He understood that what he had broken was not merely a beast, but a rhythm. Tribute had moved like clockwork. Fear had synchronized the city. The labyrinth had been the axis around which obedience revolved. Remove the axis, and motion destabilizes. Destabilization invites redefinition. He did not stay to control that redefinition. His role had been interruption, not governance. Interruption was enough. He recognized that entering the labyrinth had required stepping into uncertainty, without guarantee of return. That decision defined him more than the fight itself. Many live within systems they fear, because certainty of survival feels safer than risk of change. He chose disruption instead. Disruption carries cost, it also carries possibility. Possibility is fragile at first, but once seen, it cannot be unseen. That vision spreads. He understood that the Minotaur had not created the system. It had merely enforced it. Remove the enforcer, and the structure weakens. But if the belief behind the structure remains intact, another enforcer eventually rises. That was the real danger. Systems rebuild when fear returns. By exposing survival as possible, he did more than kill a monster. He disrupted the belief that obedience was the only option. He knew that future generations might remember the horns and forget the thread. They would imagine the fight as raw strength against savage force. Few would consider the patience required to walk slowly through darkness while something hunted nearby. But patience had been the decisive weapon. Not louder, not heavier, steadier. In confined spaces, steadiness outlasts fury. Fury exhausts itself. Sequence endures. He understood that the labyrinth had tested more than muscle. It tested clarity under pressure. Stone corridors narrowed thought as much as movement. Panic would have multiplied every turn into confusion. By refusing panic, he denied the maze its advantage. The monster embodied force. The architecture embodied disorientation. He survived both by mastering response. When response remains controlled, even overwhelming structures lose dominance. He did not expect gratitude to last forever. Gratitude fades when danger becomes memory, but the interruption would remain embedded in history. A city that once surrendered to inevitability had witnessed its fracture. That fracture could widen over time, influencing choices far beyond the labyrinth. He had not promised safety for all ages. He had proven that imposed certainty can be challenged. Sometimes proof is enough to begin change. He understood that courage without direction collapses quickly inside confined spaces. Direction had been preserved by the thread, but sustained by discipline. Each measured step had resisted the urge to rush toward confrontation. That restraint turned chaos into sequence. Sequence turned survival into possibility. Possibility turned fear into doubt. Doubt weakens authority more effectively than rebellion shouted in open air. He had whispered disruption through stone. He knew the labyrinth would never vanish from memory entirely. Its corridors would remain as reminder of what unchecked power can construct when fear becomes currency. Yet memory can transform warning into instruction. What once symbolized unavoidable death now symbolized calculated entry and deliberate exit. That reversal mattered. Reversals redefine limits. When limits are redefined, imagination expands beyond confinement, and expansion reshapes destiny quietly. He understood that systems endure because people believe they cannot be entered safely. The labyrinth had thrived on that belief. By walking inside and returning, he did not eliminate fear entirely. He altered its direction. Fear shifted from obedience to reflection. Reflection asks questions. Questions erode inevitability. Eroded inevitability weakens control. The corridors remained stone, but the meaning carved into them had changed permanently. He did not seek to immortalize the confrontation. Immortality often distorts sequence into spectacle. What mattered was not how loudly the beast had fallen, but how precisely it had been approached. Precision had preserved life where force alone would have failed. That lesson traveled further than any story of horns and blood. Systems collapse first in understanding, then in structure. Understanding had begun inside stone. He understood that the labyrinth had functioned because it erased alternatives. Those sent inside believed there was no exit, so they stopped searching for one. Belief narrows possibility. Possibility narrows action. He reversed that chain. By surviving, he restored the idea that escape could exist even within engineered confinement. Once that idea entered the city, obedience could no longer rely solely on inevitability. The fracture would widen with time. He did not imagine that the world had become safe. The labyrinth had been one design among many. Other structures would rise, built on fear, repetition, and silence. But he now carried method rather than myth. Study the pattern, contain the panic, break the condition that sustains the threat. That method mattered more than victory itself. Victory ends an event. Method prepares for the next one. He understood that what frightened rulers most was not rebellion, but demonstration. Rebellion can be crushed. Demonstration lingers. The labyrinth had stood as proof of inevitability for years. His return transformed it into proof of vulnerability. Vulnerability invites scrutiny. Scrutiny weakens unquestioned authority. He did not overthrow a kingdom. He exposed a limit. Exposed limits reshape obedience more quietly than war. He knew the story would travel beyond the island, carried by merchants and sailors who preferred survival over spectacle. They would speak of a maze that swallowed the chosen, and of a man who returned by mapping its darkness. Not every listener would believe it. Belief was not required. Possibility was enough. Once people imagine entry and exit where none seem to exist, confinement loses part of its power. He understood that fear sustains systems longer than force does. Force requires constant exertion. Fear operates quietly, persuading obedience before resistance forms. The labyrinth had embodied that quiet control. By walking its corridors and emerging alive, he disrupted fear at its root. Disrupted fear weakens repetition. Without repetition, control falters. The stone walls remained intact, but the mechanism that empowered them had shifted irreversibly. He did not return to the labyrinth again. There was no need. Its authority had already been dismantled at the center. Returning would risk turning method into myth, discipline into arrogance. He preferred distance. Distance preserves clarity. Clarity preserves sequence. What he had learned inside stone corridors would guide him elsewhere, in conflicts shaped differently, but sustained by similar conditions. The lesson traveled farther than the walls ever could. He understood that what made the labyrinth lethal was not its walls, but the belief that those walls were final. Finality suffocates initiative. Initiative disrupts control. By surviving, he restored initiative to those who had surrendered it. That restoration would not unfold overnight. Systems resist erosion, but erosion begins with a single fracture. The fracture had formed when he chose entry instead of compliance. He knew that time would smooth the edges of what had happened. The fight would become story. The story would become symbol. But symbols endure because they carry structure beneath them. The labyrinth had once symbolized unavoidable death. Now it symbolized interruption through discipline. That inversion could not be undone. Stone may outlast memory, but meaning reshapes how stone is approached. And approach determines outcome. He understood that entering the labyrinth had required surrendering comfort, not hope. Hope without structure is fragile. Structure without hope is oppressive. He carried both inside those corridors. The thread preserved direction. Discipline preserved judgment. When the beast fell, hope did not explode into triumph. It settled into clarity. Clarity sustains change longer than celebration ever could, and clarity spreads quietly, altering choices far beyond the walls that once confined it. He did not remain long enough to see the labyrinth forgotten. Forgetting was never the goal. Remembering correctly was. Remembering that fear can be studied, that confinement can be mapped, that brute force can be redirected. The beast had embodied violence. The maze had embodied inevitability. He dismantled both by refusing panic. Refusal, sustained under pressure, becomes transformation. Transformation endures where terror once ruled. He understood that the labyrinth would stand for years, stone unchanged, corridors still capable of confusion. But something fundamental had shifted. It no longer represented certain death. It represented entry with intention and exit with discipline. That redefinition could not be reversed. Structures depend on belief to maintain authority. Belief had fractured, and once inevitability cracks, no wall, however thick, can fully restore it.